In today's fast-paced project environments, organisations struggle to deliver projects on time and on budget because sadly they undervalue experience and competency. And this includes the need to provide our most valuable resource, structured training. We often rely on our people to undertake self-funded learning and use AI tools, YouTube and books to bridge the knowledge gap, assuming technical expertise translates to project leadership or viewing skills development as someone else's responsibility. This episode explores practical strategies to integrate effective credentialed learning into daily work, equipping project professionals and leaders to build resilient teams, mitigate risks, and achieve consistent project success. Welcome to the Powering ProjeX podcast, where we explore the strategies, stories, and insights that make projects thrive. I'm your host, DK, and today we're diving into the topic of the future of project management training in an AI-disrupted world, why traditional models are evolving, and how integrated credentialed learning can elevate project delivery. But before we kick off, join the project pros who put their careers first by subscribing to Powering ProjeX free on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts today. And never miss the strategies that cut project waste and accelerate your next win. Today, we are joined by Kestrel Stone, the founder and CEO of Elemental ProjeX, a leading Australian provider of project management training and consulting, established in 2012. An internationally recognised expert in project management capability development, she holds a Master's in Project Management and is a Fellow of the International Project Management Association of Australia. Kestrel serves as a board member of the Global Alliance for Project Professions and a passionate advocate for the human side of project success. Through Elemental ProjeX, she delivers accredited programs, including the Diploma of Project Management and custom solutions that empower individuals and organisations to deliver good work done well with confidence and impact. Hello, Kestrel.
Hello. Thanks, Daniela. Great to be here.
Lovely to have you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am really looking forward to this conversation because I have wondered about this topic for quite a long time. So I'm really interested in getting your thoughts. So Kestrel, many organisations today cite time constraints and competing priorities as reasons to deprioritise formal training. What are you seeing as being the biggest barriers to investing in project management capability right now?
It's such a great question and it's so multifaceted. But I think, you know that movie, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once? I think that was actually about project.
I'll have to write it down and go and watch it.
Oh, great film. But look, it's what I'm describing as kind of velocity complexity in the world today. We're just trying to do too much and everything is happening on top of everything else, not just in sort of a temporal sense that, you know, we've got to do 50 things this financial year, but even in a geographical, physical sense, you know, every time you go to build a physical asset, you know, you'll dig down and there'll be something down there that's in the way, like a road or a car park or something like that. And that doesn't slow us down. So we just still keep pushing for more. And the rate of change, the rate of project delivery is so huge that, you know, these days, I think the biggest constraint on people is that time. It's like running, because we were supposed to get so much back from all of the tools and all of the AI and where's all the time that we're meant to have. So that's one thing. I think just we're doing so much and people think that there's no time to do good training. And somebody mentioned to me the other day a great metaphor of like, it's like standing next to someone who's sawing away at a tree with a rusty saw. And you go, you know, if you just took 5 minutes to sharpen that saw, you'd get through that tree faster. And they're like, I can't stop to sharpen my saw. I've got so many trees to cut down.
This is the reality of it. And I see this everywhere. I had a great conversation once with Antonio Nieto Rodriguez, whom I absolutely love. But we talked about this. We talked about our inability to prioritise correctly. And that whole concept, and you're bang on about this, if I spend more time training my people on how to deliver well, then the reality is we will fail less, we will spend less, rework, all of
Yeah.
those things. But the unfortunate reality is we do the absolute inverse, which is I'm going to overload you with things that you may not necessarily have the experience and
Yeah.
competency to do. And
Yeah.
that just makes it a million
Yeah.
times worse. And then we end up with all sorts of issues. So
Yeah.
I agree that it is a real problem. Moving on from that, there's a growing perception that YouTube and AI and books can replace or shortcut traditional training for project teams. So, how do you see AI particularly fitting into that picture, and where does it fall short in building true project leadership competencies?
So AI is a fantastic opportunity. There's no doubt about it. And it is coming and there's no denying it. I think what we need to be really careful about is how we bring it in and what we let it replace. If you allow AI to take over certain tasks, then there is a real risk of skill atrophy, that we lose the ability to think for ourselves and solve problems and understand why we're doing the task that way. And in many ways, I think the leaders and the experts that we have today are experts because they were allowed to learn and fail earlier in their career by doing things themselves that AI is now taking over. Those menial admin tasks that we've sort of categorized as low risk and perfect for AI, that might be actually the training ground for a lot of people to learn the fundamentals of working in projects and work in general. So I do worry that we are giving AI too much. Also, of course, the problems with hallucination and IP and data privacy, data security, all of those are there as well. But from a learning point of view, I do think that that's a concern. That's not to say that it's not got a role. And if we go back, there's a foundational model in learning called the 70-20-10 model, which is that 10% of a person's skills is learned through sort of formal training. It's very content-based. 20% is social learning. 70% is doing it on the job. So where does AI fit there? And it's quite interesting, I think, because I think it should sit at the 10%. Give me some stuff to know and some things to remember, that technical bit. It might fit in the social side, maybe if we could use it to connect and facilitate conversations between other practitioners. And at that 70%, that's where it's actually being used. People are using it in their jobs, but I don't think that that's the place for it to be used. I think we need to fold it in a more structured and sensible way in terms of keeping it to that 10%. Let people learn it. And the 70-20-10, you can think of this as tell me a thing, let me see you do it, show me it, and let me have a crack. So like we just jumped to let me have a crack.
I think this is a very interesting thing. And if you don't mind, I just want to explore this with you a little bit more. When I'm looking at capability uplift and how we use AI in our 70% of work, the one thing I'm constantly having to remind people about the literature around project delivery is thinking. Thinking, because thinking is a big part of initiating and planning. Initiating and planning and the thoroughness by which you do those activities either sets you up for success or failure. Because if you have planned thoroughly, and then when you get into execution, minor things pivot, it's okay because I've got a plan. I can see where that's going to change and I can just work to those new risks, new issues, whatever it may be, but everything else can stay on track. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
When you have not thoroughly planned, which means you've not done thorough thinking work, it's very easy for everything to get derailed once you are in delivery. And so I keep having to remind people, well, why do I have to do a management plan? And why do I have to do this? And because I want you to think.
Yeah.
I want you to really think about how you're going to do this. And I need you to think through everything, every single detail. And I always go back to my my most favourite project management book, which is How Big Things Get Done by Ben Flyford. I love
You're
that
looking
book.
to the side, and I am too, the same book.
Right there. If I could grab it, but I'll have one of those moments where I'll get caught by my string.
I've got Antonia's there too, by the way.
Did you buy Powered by ProjeX? Have you read that one yet?
I've got
That's
this.
his new one.
I've got this one. There you go.
Yeah. Oh, there you go. I've got them both here as well. No, Antonio's got a brand spanking new one out that he brought out in January, which I haven't read yet and I must read. But
I haven't got it either.
yeah, I love those two books. What I really discovered, when Ben juxtaposed what had happened with the Guggenheim Museum and what happened with the Sydney Harbour Bridge, and he was really able to show the difference in the thinking. And it really made me realise why all these management planning examples are so important. And even P3, M3 really recognises that. So what I find interesting, though, is when we are in delivery in a corporate environment, we want to get into delivery as quickly as possible. We want to get into execution. It is assumed that projects is execution, when in fact, the majority of the project should be, have you thought this through really, really well? And then let's execute really, really fast.
Yeah, people bolt.
Correct, and people bolt. And the funny thing about what you're saying is there's a part of me that feels that the inverse is true, which is if you are using AI to help you think through what you're doing, does this materials make sense? Is this supply chain safe? Little questions like that trip people up. Even just looking at, as you mentioned earlier, about data security and company IP, having a closed AI, a small language model, as we like to call them, whereby you can put your procurement policy in there and say, okay, help me plan out procurement. How long is this actually going to take? Because so many organisations, I was talking to an organisation recently whereby they trip up on recruitment for projects all the time, where I've totally misforecasted how long recruitment is going to take to actually get the staff here to start the planning and start the execution. And therefore, I've blown all of my schedules. And it's like, they're the things that AI can really help you think through if you're asking the right questions.
Yeah.
But I tend to find the real problem here is, do we use AI to tell us the answer?
That's right.
Or do we use AI to help us think through the answer? Because we have the context, the AI doesn't. And so
that's
it's really important.
Just to piggyback on that, AI is great when there's a right answer. If there's a best practice and a way it should be done, get it from there. But the problem I think it is creating culturally is that people who are using it earlier in their careers are getting a sense that there is a right answer. And I just need to ask AI what that answer is. And the reality is projects are unique and they are collaborative and they are deeply contextual. They're defined differently by different people. People have different agendas and views and priorities. And the role of that project manager is to facilitate the conversation between all of those people, reconcile all of those different opinions, and get us in the same boat so we're all heading in the same direction.
Yes.
And that's the piece that I think we are at risk of losing, where people don't challenge, they don't lean into the ambiguity and enable those different perspectives to be shared. And so, like you say, we get in, we execute, we bolt, and we don't even worry if we're heading in the wrong direction until we've delivered something that no one can use and benefit from.
Yes.
So keeping it to things where there's a right answer, I think is a good kind of North Star. Is this an answerable thing or is this something that needs to be negotiated?
Yeah, I agree with you. I've read quite a few books on project management now, and it's all kind of synthesized into my mind. Do you know what I mean? Whereas when you're young, you don't have that. So there is an element of, this is the process that our organization uses. How do I structure my way through this? And I think that's where you can use AI really well. But as you say, that's not always the answer, because you might go back to your project team and say, okay, this is the starting point. Does this seem sound? You can't believe everything that's there. You have to go and touch base with the people that are around you and say, okay, does this seem reasonable? Where do we need to tweak it? you can't accept what comes out of AI as being the ultimate answer, but it can definitely be used as a guide. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Yeah. So making sure that humans are connecting and that the space for problem exploration is protected,
Yeah.
that we don't just leap to a solution that an AI got. I know that the models are evolving, and I know on February 5th there was a big leap forward.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are still using the version of ChatGPT that was 20% trained on Reddit. So
Yeah.
what has been done before might not be what we need to do next time.
Yes.
And in the world of sort of complex project management, we talk about complexity through different lenses. We have structural complexity where there's lots of activities. The work itself is fairly straightforward. It's just there's lots of them. Each activity might be simple, but when there's 10,000 and they're all interdependent, it becomes structurally complex. So that's great for AI. AI can analyze the complexity and say this first, that next, negative float here, and it can highlight all of that. That's where it should be used. The technical complexity where we're needing to innovate something to solve a problem we haven't tackled before. Perhaps there's a role for AI there in throwing up some options or some ideas, prototypes, running some scenarios for us, maybe that. Directional complexity, though, this is about politics. This is about different perspectives. This is people in your governance structure or in your delivery team motivated by different things and seeing the value differently. So one person might be motivated to maximize quality of outcome 10 years from now. One party might be motivated to save money. One might be just all about compliance. And down there in the delivery team, that person might be motivated by profit maximization and that person about keeping a good client. So until these kind of different agendas and priorities are aligned, you're going to have this really deep dysfunction within the project, even if you've got a pretty Gantt chart. It's always people make or break it. So that's the directional part of it. And then the temporal part is the other piece that we're seeing really kind of explode at the moment. And that's this sense of emergence, things that will happen that nobody could predict because we have so many systems operating within these projects, social media and supply chain, geopolitics, culture of the delivery team, the contract types we're using. And all of these systems interacting are creating events that sort of compound on each other. And before you know it, we're in a situation nobody could have predicted. So making sure that people are having conversations and keeping the channels open and keep circling back and keep sanity checking that the environment that we thought we were delivering for is still the environment we think is in place, or has the system changed? Do we need to do something different with this project because we're not in that world anymore? Something happened in the last 3 months. It means we need to pivot. And it's all about systems thinking. It's all about collaboration. It's all about communication. And those happen to be the 3 skills that Gonski, our education guru, and Shergold, who did the project program management review, those 2 teamed up and pointed to those 3 skills. So whether it's primary, tertiary education, professional learning, we need to be making sure that people can communicate, collaborate, and think critically about the world that they're in. And that's where I think we need to hold AI back, maintain that space for people to develop those skills and to own that capability to make sure we never let that atrophy. Once that goes, we're toast.
Oh, I love that. You make such a good point. All right. So how is the shift towards learning in the flow of work, such as that micro learning and on-the-job coaching and peer-based development, how is that changing the role of training providers like yourself?
Yeah. But it's tied into some of the things that relate to the first question we explored. What's happening here? Why aren't we training people? And we talked a bit about everything everywhere all at once, that it's the velocity. But sometimes it's also that people feel that their employees churn so much that by the time they train them, they'll be out of the organisation and they'll lose the benefit of that investment in learning. And the phrase that often gets thrown around in my world is, what happens if I train people and they leave? And then the counter argument is, what happens if you don't train them and they stay? But I still think there's this sense of people should have that. I will recruit people, I'll outsource that, I'll partner for that. But developing the internal capability, I'm feeling, is people are sort of abrogating that responsibility and pushing that out onto other people, especially in a project space where they might see it as the role of learning and development to do that, not necessarily the role of the project director or the PMO to do that. And organisations that thrive are ones that really own that capability, and they treat it like a living thing, like a plant, where if you starve it and don't water it, it dies. But if you keep that capability maintained and keep people trained, keep people learning, if you invest in it, then you have this really healthy capability to do stuff, to execute strategies through projects or deliver your contract through a solid project management framework. So that's part of it, the who owns the responsibility for capability. Part of it is that the roles are changing, and we're seeing people invest not so much in roles anymore as in skills. And I think that's the biggest shift that we're seeing in the training space. We don't train for roles because the roles will be who knows what in 5 years' time. But what we need to train to is a core set of skills that are transferable and that will be useful. And so micro learning and micro credentialing, this is where that fits in, that regardless of what the person is doing, we know that we're going to need them to be able to, well, let's start with the first three: communicate, collaborate, and think critically. But they may also need to engage with supply chain. So there's a skill set there. Or to have the commercial acumen to manage a contractor, or whatever those specific skills might be. You can pick and mix the right skills for different roles as those roles evolve. So there's something there that's pushing us to not sort of define a role and train people for it, but rather to invest in disaggregated skills. So what does that look like in the workplace? It less and less looks like people going off for training in 2, 4, 5 days. I remember when we used to do 5-day immersive blocks of training. Defence loved this because I feel like it was a testament of their strength and mettle that they could last that long, 9 till 9, 5 days a week. And if it's not that job. But we did used to train people like that. And I don't think we'll ever go back to it. People can't take people out of the workforce for that long to do these big blocks of training. So what we're seeing instead is breaking it up and drip feeding it out. So even more than not taking people out for big blocks of time, it's more about integrating training with the work that they're doing. So not sending people off for learning and then they come back and they're better, but they can't put the tools down. So if they can't put that saw down, how do you help them sharpen it while they're still sawing? And what does that look like? And can the training room come to them? And maybe we can use AI for that too. Like, can we create simulations and scenarios where they can experiment and fail and learn from that and get better without the consequence of having failed on the job or, caused a major problem for a big project? But it's in the doing of it that people learn, that 70%. So can we use that in the flow of work? Can we create learning pockets that are safe, that people can practice and fail? How do we bring that into their workplace? Micro-learning, I think, is one form of it. Coaching, mentoring, buddying, little videos that they might get fed in their emails or even in the lift as people are heading up. Is there something there that we can grab them? And the metaphor that we've been using for a while is it's like the worker who, by the way, does not identify as a learner. They're just doing their job. Learning and development people call them learners. We call them students, but that's not how they identify. They are a worker. They have got a thing to do, and that is what they're focused on. So it's like they're a marathon runner. And as a learning partner, Elemental Projects, I visualize myself as the cup bearer.
Yeah.
Little cups of Gatorade.
100%.
To them, have this, drink this. And if I end up a total mess covered in Gatorade at the end, then I've done a great job because that person's still going. And they're faster, they're refreshed, and that's a good day.
Yeah. I love so much of what you're saying here, but going right back to the start of where you started with your argument, globally, we have an issue with the fact that project delivery outcomes are not improving. Our success rates, there is no data to indicate that for all the training and learning and books that we read, that we are actually improving in our project outcomes. It seems to be very consistent, and it has been that way for many, many years. And it's quite disheartening. And I really do believe it is exactly as you say, who's responsible for training us? It seems to be that I hold the accountability. And the unfortunate truth, even if I just look at myself, I didn't become fascinated by learning more about my craft until probably when I was in my 40s, that I actually got to the point where I was able to take breathers in my career and go and learn something because I wasn't tied to my desk,
Sawing that tree with a rusty saw.
Correct, because I'd gotten to the point where I didn't need to be tied to a desk. And as a result of that, I thought, you know what, I've got money to invest now. And I always say to people, even when we did some analysis many years ago for IPMA in Europe, and we were analysing all of these survey responses, and it really became clear to me that learning was a luxury product. Becoming a fellow of a membership organisation, as you and I are, was a luxury product. You have to have a certain amount of money and you have to have a certain amount of time to be able to invest in your education in order to get through the process. But the people that are actually down in the weeds delivering, they don't have that luxury a lot of the time. I've got a mortgage to pay. I've got 2 young kids at home. I've got to hammer it. Do you know what I mean? I've got to get through this project and roll off and roll on to the next one. And I've got 5 of them running at the same time. But the whole concept of roles and skills is really important, because I agree with you. I had this conversation actually a couple of weeks ago with someone. Well, I don't have to train you because it's someone else's responsibility. And I don't necessarily think that's great for project outcomes. And I think that our ability to be able to serve people with knowledge at the moment they need it in a bite-sized quantity, where I can teach you exactly what's necessary and where you need to focus your mind so that you can think critically about what you're doing in that moment, is the best way to do it. Because if I had sent you on a course about contract management 6 months ago, I guarantee if I ask you today, did you really think this through? You'll probably remember 2 or 3 things that were said, and that's it. You know, and when you really look at the contract management chapter, it's like 25 pages. So there is no chance you've remembered all of that at the moment when you need to practice it. Yeah.
And what you're talking about there is people are learning and growing by doing it. And then in that 70%, how do we inject the 10 that they forgot?
Correct.
And they say the half-life of learning is Monday lunchtime the next week. Sustained transformation, true capability uplift, it's got to be done over a long period of time. You've got to allow them to actually do it. So it sounds counterproductive. It sounds like I'm contradicting what I said earlier, but great training and great learning is about allowing people a really long period of time to do that course while not taking them out for big blocks of time. And making sure that they have a chance to implement what they're learning with feedback and support and, that book note, that noted page in that text.
Correct.
And to know where to get it, to know what to trust a large language model with and when to pull out a book, because I know the person who wrote that has done it in a really rigorous way, and that there's research and study behind it and not just 50,000 comments in Reddit.
Yeah.
So thinking about how we deploy that, and our biggest product, the thing that I am the most passionate about, is our Diploma of Project Management, which, by the way, we deliver for people who don't call themselves project managers. They're accidental project managers. The vast majority of people who do projects are accidental, They identify as something else. They're trained, degree qualified in something else, but they go up the ladder in that technical domain until they get senior enough to be given a project to manage. And at that moment, they're a project manager. The job title might still be policy officer or construction lead, but they are now in charge of something temporary that isn't part of BAU. That makes them a project manager. and the transition out of their technical expertise and into the world of project management, that transition is so often made without any kind of preparatory skill development or training in project management. It's a whole different bag of knowledge and skills. And so then they just learn it on the job. The most expensive and risky way to train someone. Just let them figure it out through trial and error with a live project. So the Diploma of Project Management is a year-long program, and it's layered. And this is what I really think people should think about how they train their people. How do you introduce it in an easy, then harder, and getting more and more realistic and more challenging, and then putting them into the role? It was an idea that occurred to me that I didn't invent, but I went to a presentation at Simulations Australia yonks ago, and there was a head of ER, head of an emergency room for a hospital in there, and she was talking about how they train emergency room nurses. So if you think about, how do you become a really competent ER nurse? Like, if you were to go, read this in ChatGPT, go to this 2-day course, and then rock up at the ER and learn the rest on it, you would absolutely traumatize that person. They'd last one shift and be gone. They would not be competent. Nobody would. So what they do is they get them to learn how to suture a canvas. So they learn how to do stitches on a canvas. And then they put the canvas on a mannequin. And then the mannequin is replaced by a human, but with a fake arm, and they're still suturing, and everybody's calm and quiet, and maybe the person's talking to them. And then there's another layer where the person is pretending to cry and be upset, and there's sound and noise and lights, and there's fake blood spurting, but it's still a prosthetic arm, it's still a fake arm. And if you can suture that wound under those conditions, then you're ready for the real thing. So this layered learning process is normal in that world. And when I, at that time, turned around and looked at projects, I was like, we just throw them in the ER. We don't even send them to a 2-day course. People, accidental project managers, they just start being accountable for projects. And they're like, what's a risk register? I guess I need one of them. And we just can't do that to people. Diploma, and it doesn't have to be a diploma, but with what I think really works is long-form professional development programs. You have to make it easy. So we use gamified simulations set in the world of a TV show. So super simple, very fun, very psychologically safe, but they're filling out the templates and they're getting sign-off from a governance structure, and they're moving through and they're delivering for a client, they're getting feedback. So you're simulating all the things. And then the next layer is a case study with some peers. And the next layer is a more challenging case study they do alone. And then it's a work-based project with feedback. And so you're sort of layering that competency development while you're integrating 70, 20, 10, the 10 being the training, the 20 being your peer learning and activities and looking at how other people do it, and you get them to do peer coaching outside of the training room. And then your 70% is on the job with feedback. And that's when they're ready. But it takes time. You can't just leave them alone in the 70% with chat.
And I love what you're saying here about feedback. I've been looking at people who own businesses where project delivery is extremely successful all the time. And I've been trying to work out what makes you different to other organizations. And I really do believe a big part of it is feedback loops. Some companies are fantastic at going out and asking for feedback. And it's really interesting because when I look at my role as a PM and I look back over my career at the projects, and I was saying this yesterday, P3M3 really focuses on evaluating what you're doing on a regular basis and how you implement early warning triggers and things like that, so that you can be constantly measuring the effectiveness of what you're doing. And that really all comes through feedback, right? But the reality is feedback loops are not great in project delivery. So I'll just give you the example. You know, my 9-year-old, I have to check his homework for school. It's a feedback loop. At work, when I put forward my schedule, my risk register, whatever it may be, I get very little feedback from the people that I'm expecting feedback from. And the reason is I'm not trained, they're not sure of what their role should be. I'm just learning my way through my role. And as a result, that feedback loop is
Well,
not there, and then we're not learning. So
I think there's a much bigger reason why you don't get that feedback, and much more problematic for us. And that's people don't want to create awkwardness.
yeah,
They don't want to hurt your feelings. They don't want to be a bully. They don't want to nitpick. They don't want to undermine your confidence. And so all these human things get in the way of saying, that's not how it should be done. This should be phrased like this. And I think, like, even the way we use tools like ChatGPT, like, we give it super direct feedback because we know we can't offend it.
Yes.
It's like, not like that. Write it like this. Too unprofessional. Make it shorter. Make it lift the tone. No. And so we get this really targeted feedback into a robot.
Yes.
In a way
we
that
can't do it with each
just
other.
can't do that with a person.
Yes.
We just don't.
Yes.
With people.
Yes. Why don't we ask for feedback more often? You know, why don't we just say, I really need you to critique what I'm doing. I really need you to be honest. Is this right? Have I thought this through? Is it accurate in your eyes? Does it meet your needs? It's all really important things. Why do you believe that these credentials like your Diploma of Project Management remain essential in an era of rapid change, and what steps are needed to build greater industry confidence in diploma-style courses?
The role for credentials and diplomas and professional certifications like IPMA level D to level A, what I think we need to be really thoughtful about is, at what point do all roles need certain skills? And how do we align these qualifications and certifications with core fundamental transferable skill sets? So rather than have qualifications that are shaped around a role, if we're moving away from training to roles and we're moving to training to skills, then how does the qualification pick up a set of core skills? And the role of quals and certs is always about creating confidence. Like, really, that's all it's about. How do I have the confidence that this person I've never worked with before can operate in a certain way and know how to do some stuff? That label, that sticker that they've got, that's what gives me the confidence that they went to university and they did this course, so I'll infer that they can competently do some stuff in the workplace. So I think that there has to be a place for shortcutting the confidence. Otherwise, you're going to have to vet everyone on everything when they come in. So, making sure that we have confidence that people can do things and know things as they step into a role, but also that those qualifications and certifications are kept current, and that the skills that they were trained in, that I had confidence in because they did that qualification or certification, that's still reflective of what they need to know and do today. So qualifications with certifications have always sat side by side. A qualification is a sort of testament of knowledge and of what you can do in a simulated environment. And universities and vocational education providers like RTOs, like Elemental Projects, we operate in that space, making sure people have the knowledge and skills to do in a certain domain. Certifications are about recent experience. So if one's about knowledge and skills, the other is about, have you done this recently? And have you kept your knowledge and your professional competency up to date and in step with how things have evolved since you got that qualification? So there is a role for both of them. And as people churn and move around, I think if we're going to lift organisational, industry and national capability in project delivery, but also project management's just a synonym for getting stuff done, right? If we're going to be better at getting stuff done, whether it's submarines or roads or understanding the impact of social media on teenage girls, whatever these things are we're trying to do, if we're going to get better at it, then we need the confidence that the people leading these things have certain knowledge, skills, mindset, ways of operating that we can rely on, that they can collaborate, think critically. 3, but what are the rest? What do we need confidence in?
And this is really interesting because I've been talking a lot about competency matrices and models recently and frameworks around competency. And many organisations don't have them. Many organisations actually fear them because they fear that once they have them, they're going to have to make more of an effort to actually make sure that the people they're hiring into different roles align with the competencies required. Some projects require more on the stakeholder and change side. Others require more on the technical side. Others require more in the risk side, right? And it's really about knowing that about your project and then saying, okay, when I am talking to people that are potential candidates for these kinds of roles, I need to be aware of that and I need to make sure that they show the competency at the level that's required for this particular project. The unfortunate truth is we're still just humans. We tend to interview people and within 3 minutes work out, do I like you enough to want to work with you? Does that make sense?
Oh,
Do you know what I
yeah.
mean? How do you
Yeah.
feel about competency models yourself?
Yeah. Look, I'm conflicted because I work in the space every single day, but I also think it's not definable or measurable or controllable. I think competency is deeply contextual. And somebody who was competent in this project might have been competent there because they were supported, they had a team, there was a culture where people surfaced bad news early, they had good relationships with some of the partners, or there was a strong social pull, a sense of purpose there. And all of those things that are not responsible for, they just benefited from, all of those things is what made them successful. And you take that same person and you put them in an organisation with a toxic culture where they're not supported and the sponsor doesn't have time for them and the team isn't interested in collaborating because on any other day they're a competitor, that person is not going to be successful. So it's it's fascinating, and I haven't found the bottom of the well yet. I'm still kind of digging down and thinking, why are people competent? I think a huge amount of it is cultural and a huge amount of it is relationship based. It's so much about the psychosocial skills of leadership and seeing the moving plates and how one shift in one system, like maybe the politics of the business, is going to change what we need to do in our project, and getting on that early, seeing that as an early weak signal and being proactively curious about it and getting in there. And so being competent is not just about, can you do a Gantt chart? Can you do this?
Correct.
There are hygiene skills that if they're missing are a problem, but then just the presence of those skills doesn't lead to success. It's all those leadership, thinking, psychosocial skills. That's what I think determines success. And I think the 3-minute interview is a good example of that. We don't really want a robot in this role. One size fits one. So what we want are methodology agnostic project managers who can look at a problem, look at the politics, look at the delivery team and say, I think this is how we need to approach it. These are the conversations we need to have. And all of that thinking and talking is what leads to good content in a document. But the documents, they're just paper. I feel
Correct.
It's the content of those that we need to really focus on.
I think both of these things are true at the same time, to be absolutely honest. I think that there is absolutely a need to understand what makes someone competent, even on paper. Do you know what I mean? Have they really dealt with a project of this size and complexity before in this technical domain? They are all things that will help your project exponentially if you get those things right at the interview stage. But you are right also in that anybody put in a really terrible project environment is highly unlikely to succeed. Like, there are very few people that can turn those ships around. If the ship is already cruising towards the iceberg, it's a bit hard to turn around the Titanic. You know, it's tricky stuff. You can, it's achievable. I've seen people do it, but I don't think it's the easiest
Not
thing
for
in the
everyone.
world.
But that's not to say that we can't work on it. There are skills, it's just different skills. So when we talk about competency frameworks and can they do this and have they got that, we just need to be realistic about what skills are hygiene factors and what are those skills that are going to be needed in a more complex space. Correct. And I remember this engagement, we were brought in to do an assessment for a project leader with a portfolio of projects that was not going well. And he had a whole lot of project managers of different levels of skills. Some were trained, some were not, some were qualified, some were not. But he was looking at their competency. So he'd ranked them for competence according to his own ideas. And then he'd matched his most competent people up with his most expensive projects. So he had some billion-dollar things down to some piddly things that had no budget. And when we came in and we did the analysis, we evaluated the projects for complexity, and we used a simple tool called the Sifter, which is available on the GAPS website. If anybody wants it, it's free. But we use the Sifter, which will ask you 7 questions about the initiative. And depending on your answers, it'll spit out a number. And if the number's in this range, it's low complexity. This range is mid, this range is high. So we ranked his projects for complexity using that tool. And then we ranked his project managers for competency using a competency framework. And what we found was, firstly, the project director, the client, they had a really great eye for talent because our list for competence was the same as his list. So it wasn't that he didn't know how good his people were at things, but the size of those projects, the way he'd ranked his projects was by budget. And budget was actually inversely correlated to complexity. So his billion-dollar project was actually one of his most simple because he was buying a very expensive piece of equipment. And in this very large organisation, there was a very specific and prescribed documented process for doing a billion-dollar acquisition and heaps of people to support you and guide you along the way. So it was actually relatively straightforward. But one of the ones that had no budget was a project to measure the emissions from overseas operations. And
very technically
complex, political, like it was just
off
hairy,
the charts.
really off the charts complex. And he had his junior people on that.
Oh, wow.
So when we sorted the list for complexity and his best people got on the most complex things, that's when things started to turn around. But it's a different way of thinking about competency. Some of these people, they didn't have qualifications in what you'd expect. You know, they had this ability to think and to challenge and to negotiate the way forward in an environment that will never be clear. You'll never have complete information. So looking at what is the complexity of the thing and what is the competency profile of the person I need leading that thing. Person who will be successful in that space. Because traditional project management is great for predictive projects.
Correct.
But really complex projects is where we start to see critical thinking skills, psychosocial skills, your ability to motivate and influence and all of that. That's what pops out in the complex space as a determinant of success or failure. And the Gantt chart is a hygiene factor.
Totally agree with you. Even though the further I get in my career, the more I'm starting to believe that predictive nor adaptive methods deal with complexity very well. If you can keep it small and uncomplicated, you are much more likely to succeed. I think people try to eat the elephant way too often, and neither of these methods is going to pose well for you if you've not, as you say, if you don't have the confidence in dealing with really big, hairy, ambiguous environments, regardless of what model you apply.
That's right. And where it fails is where project leaders say, this has always worked for me, perhaps because they've come from a space where they've been rewarded and celebrated for structure and more planning. And so we'll just do more of that on this thing. They don't appreciate that, you know, a complicated thing is different to a complex thing.
Correct.
Be iterative, and we need to be flexible, and we need contracts that have the capacity to collaborate with our supply chain the way we need.
Correct.
And to tap when that emerging information is coming.
Correct.
But what I think is happening, Daniela, is complexity is creeping into everything.
Correct.
And like that structural, temporal, directional, and technical complexity and innovation, you know, those 4, we're now adding to them with social complexity and the interpersonal argy-bargy, what I'm calling velocity complexity, like everything everywhere all at once. You're doing too much, you're going too fast. And then boundary complexity, like we're doing it across boundaries. And so you've got specialized teams and long supply chains, and they've all got contracts that may not be back to back. And all of that is ratcheting up the complexity. So even on those things that traditionally have been great with time, cost, quality, and a good plan, and we stick to it, all of those things we now need to be more elevated in how we approach them. We need to have more of those psychosocial skills. So when you think about credentials and qualifications, yes, I want the confidence that somebody coming in knows some things and some models and some tools because they've certified as a level B or whatever qualification they're holding. That gives me some confidence, but that doesn't mean that I cannot water the plant. We now constantly have to be thinking about how do we create the environment where these people have the skills to think critically and communicate and collaborate in an increasingly complex environment.
I'll ask you a question, Kestrel. So collaboration has always been a thing, but I think more so in the past 10 to 15 years of my career. I hear that word much more often. It was quite funny because this week someone said to me, collaboration is big in our environment. We have to constantly remind people that they need to collaborate. And it's like, yeah, that shouldn't be a new thing. But moving on, collaboration means that we take into consideration and aim to engage and extract knowledge from many parties around us, which I truly do believe going broad in your stakeholder engagement is a very wise thing to do up front, to gather as much conflicting information as you can and try and synthesize that down to what's really important for what we're doing today and how we're going to do that. Those things are important, but the more we collaborate, the more complex it becomes.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden, and Elon Musk refers to this all the time, dumb requirements, he says. Everyone gives me all of these requirements, and then I have to come back and say, well, I've only got this amount of time and I've only got this amount of budget, and this is what we intended to achieve. So these things have to go and be dealt with at some other point.
Yeah.
And this is what we need to focus on. But it can be really challenging when you are new in your career or you might have only had 5 to 10 years worth of experience, and it can be really challenging to think those things through. Is collaboration causing a little bit more of a sense of complexity?
100%. And there is a sweet spot. You can over collaborate, you can have over governance. We're using the terms minimum viable governance and minimum viable collaboration or consultation. We have to do it because we have to bring people along for the journey, because if they don't buy in and they had no say, then they can actively or passively resist the thing later. All of those justifications are true and real. But if you don't get out of this collaboration space, you'll never build it. You'll never move forward. There has to be a cap on how much, say, the community or the end users can have a say on what this thing looks like. And at some point, somebody needs to make a decision, and we need to build. And we're just going to build to this. We're going to stop asking and stop getting feedback. And we've had that window, and that was what that was about. And now we're here, and any changes will be done in continuous improvement once we're in BAU. Because otherwise we won't deliver on time or on budget and nobody gets anything. Right. So knowing where that balance is a fine art, and I think that's part of the skill set of a great project leader. But we're seeing tools like IAP2 being used really usefully. So it was actually, IAP2 is designed for public participation in major projects, but I'm using it with any project, and I just replace the word public with stakeholder, because it's got a really useful nuancing of vocabulary. And what I think people need to do is ratchet up the level of consultation or collaboration where the stakeholder is really important or the matter is really important to them on a risk basis, and then ratchet it down where it's not that important and the risk is low. And so the language that we use is really important here, because if you say the word collaborate, you need to be really careful, because that is a big word with big promises under the hood.
Yeah.
That when those expectations aren't met, that's where that pushback comes from. So being able to set the expectation up front by saying, I'm going to inform, I'm going to consult, I'm going to involve, I'm going to collaborate, or I'm going to empower, all the way up. So 5 stages of consultation that give the party you're talking to more and more control and autonomy over what happens. And it doesn't have to be a blanket category. It's not, I'm going to collaborate on everything, but there might be just one thing in your project that is really important to that party, that stakeholder group or individual, and nobody else cares.
Yeah.
And so on that one thing, we go all the way up and we empower them. And that's how they get on side. And it's that one thing that would have put them off side and would have caused them to throw rocks at the project or wide ant it politically. And like at the end of the day, you can have the best Gantt chart in the world, but if people are out to kill your project, then they will.
At the moment, I'm doing a little bit of work on stakeholder analysis, and that is just such a wonderful example as to why your analysis and pitching where do people sit on my power influence scale, where do I want them to be, and what strategy am I going to employ to get them to where I need them to be becomes so important, because so few people think this through. They just want everybody to feel communicated with and everybody to feel positive about the project. And the reality is it just doesn't happen that way. It's just,
And you can over communicate too. You can turn them off.
yes,
Like, I have so much information coming at me. My inbox is
correct.
so full. I don't want to know. Like, if it affects me, I want to know. But if I can't tell the difference, then I just feel like I need to know it all. And I'm just going to resist the whole thing because there might be one thing in there that's threatening to me.
Correct.
Really being able to be empathetic to what each group is going to care about and only communicating that to them, only collaborating in the spaces where it will add value and help them and help us, and it's a win-win. Finding those pockets and ratcheting up, that's the skill of it. But if you go to, I have a client with 38 people on a steerco.
Oh my Lord.
You can't meet with 38 people at the same time.
And
So,
do my job? No.
like,
I'd need a big stakeholder budget for that.
how do you make decisions when people can't meet? And so that's too much. That needs to be pruned back.
Way too much. Way too
Yeah,
much.
thinking about collaboration as essential, but there is a scale.
Levels.
And there's going to be a sweet spot.
Correct. Very good point, Kestrel. Very good. Many professionals are promoted into project roles based on their technical and operational expertise alone, and I find this quite a lot. What mindset shifts and skills gaps do you most commonly observe when technical specialists transition into project management roles?
So we've talked about this a little bit already when we talk about accidental project managers becoming the project manager of the thing they were a technical expert in. There are some risks. There are advantages. The advantages are they are familiar with the work and they can really easily talk to people who'll be doing the work and give some guidance and that sort of thing. The disadvantage is I think they become a little blinkered in that sometimes that's all that they pay attention to. And they might not be looking at the stakeholders or looking at the cyber issues or looking at what's happening in social media. These other things don't get noticed because what's popping out to them is their own technical background, the thing that maybe they're interested in or they think is really important where they came from. So a little bit of bias and blinkering is a risk, but also the whole approach, the whole assumptions that they bring in that they don't even know they're making, like more planning is better. That is an engineering mindset. And if you're an engineer or a software engineer or lots of roles where you've been there's a right way to do it, you've been in that, if we can use the Cynefin framework, you've been in that clear environment where best practice is better and there's always a better way and a right way to do something. You've been rewarded and celebrated for that your whole career. That's always worked for you. And then now you're in a leadership role, project leadership. It's actually, if it's complex, and we've been talking about complexity creeping in, that's not going to help. And in some cases, it's counterproductive because it forces you into a really rigid and inflexible model of the project called the project plan, the Gantt chart. It's way too detailed. And you don't challenge it and you don't iterate it and you don't you don't allow the different perspectives to be aired because I've done the detail. Just more and more estimates and more accuracy wins the day. And that mentality, when it's carried through to project management and project leadership, that can be really undermining. So having to unpick some of that is part of the journey of growing out of your technical domain and into projects, is knowing that there isn't going to be a best and right way for a lot of these things, that in a complex space you have to try some stuff, knowing that you can't be sure of the outcome, you can't control the outcome. It's not like construction where floors and walls and roofs will always make a house. In community consultation, I can hope that the town hall I do, the social media campaign, and the emails that I've written, a couple of coffees I've had, I can hope that in combination, those activities lead to the social license or the stakeholder being on my side. But I can't predict it and I can't control it. And people are always going to be complex. And what lands well on one day might land totally different on another day or with a different person. And so you've got to let go of the need for certainty and accuracy and detail in certain parts of your project. Know where to lean in on the predictive side and know when to go for something much more adaptable, much more flexible, much more open to ambiguity.
Mm-hmm. I find this a really interesting question because I once had someone say to me, there's no point building a golden toilet if there's no house at the end of this. And it was a really good point because we had gotten to the point where we had so many requirements that were all gold standard. Great that we want to be gold standard everything, but in reality, if you don't build the tool as a result of it, or if it takes us 10 years longer to get there, that's just not a good outcome at all.
Yeah.
I love consulting with technical experts in the work that I do, and it helps me to really formulate in my mind what is ultimately important here and what is not. But then at some point, I need to draw the line and say, I recognize it's not going to be gold standard, but we have to move on because we won't get it delivered.
That's exactly the skill set we're talking about, the trade-offs, the
Correct.
understanding what is of value. And what makes projects so much harder now compared to the Guggenheim or the Sydney Harbour Bridge, what makes it so much more challenging is all the different layers that we put on top of it. So not just build a thing, but you've got to consult the community and you've got to do it safely.
Politics of the day.
No modern slavery in your supply chain, and it's got to in well, and we've got to have great
and no emissions. Yes,
and no emissions. and so it's like what was just an engineering thing has become a much more complex thing, and the engineering skills are not the same ones as the skills that we need for the bigger thing.
Correct. So what do you consider to be the most important skills for a project manager in 2026, particularly as AI and hybrid methodologies continue to reshape our roles and delivery approaches?
Yeah, look, hard to argue with Gonski and Shergold. I do think we are seeing communication, collaboration, critical thinking. But if we unpack that a bit, it's knowing how to connect with people, knowing how to take another perspective, knowing how to understand what is of value and think beyond the life of one project, but think about it in the context of the rich and complex space it will be used in. So we're creating this product, but why and what's the benefit and for whom and who says and how will we measure that? And in 10 years, will that be true too? And so even I think it boils down to a project I saw recently. It was really clever, where they were building a jail. And the thinking is that the purpose of a jail is what? Is to get people off the street, ultimately it's got to be in the context of reducing crime. And the outcomes have got to be around recidivism. And even more complex is the idea that putting people in jails makes them more likely to offend. They call jails universities for criminals. But you can't be elected for being soft on crime. So there's a complexity there. Yes. So you're building a jail and the idea is to reduce recidivism. In order to reduce people offending again, they need to feel connected to the outside world. They need to feel honour and dignity and that they're going to have a job and
a role to play, purpose,
identity for them that they can live with.
Yes.
And so how do you create that? Well, okay, let's say that that's helped by having some kind of actual communication channel to the outside. That you're not just forming your connections within the jail because that's all you've got. So they're wanting to put these things like iPads in the jail cells. So inmates can communicate with their families, their friends on the outside, that they can still feel connected and still feel those things. But they aren't ready. and they don't know how to do it safely, and they don't know how to do it without enabling organised crime and those sorts of things. So what they've done is they've built this new jail and they've buried a bunch of cables in the walls of every cell and they've concreted over the top of them. Because one day, maybe 10 years from now, maybe AI will solve this for
Drill a
us.
hole, correct, yep.
Punch through the concrete, pull out the
Yeah.
wire they need, whack on the technology, and they're ready. Whereas wiring an operational prison in 10 years is going to be
Too hard.
impossible.
Correct.
So that sort of thinking, like, what is the purpose of a jail?
Yes.
How do I realize that outcome, that benefit 10 years
Yes.
from now? What does the world look like then? Will people need stuff because of AI and because of climate change? I think that's what we're needing our project managers to be able to do. It's a big ask, but otherwise we just build the wrong thing faster and cheaper.
It's really interesting that you say this, Kestrel. Other learned professionals in our industry, and one particular conversation I had where project managers shouldn't be worried about business benefits and things like that. That is owned by the project sponsor and the benefit owners. They need to work those things out and give us what it is we are required to deliver, noting that we measure ourselves to those metrics. Because if you haven't delivered on those metrics, then it's not the right thing to do. And I sometimes agree with that and sometimes disagree. I like the idea of being involved in something that is purposeful. That actually gives me a sense of purpose, which makes me want to do the job. When I'm disconnected from that, I'm like, oh, I'm just a ticket taker for someone else. It's really not my gig. I don't feel aligned to it. I'm not interested. It's a very fine line, though, a very fine line, because otherwise we take accountability for things that we may not always have the accountability for. If that
Absolutely
makes
right.
sense.
And there has to be a line, right? There's always client, owner, operator, sponsor, project
Correct.
manager, work package, projects, work packages, programs, portfolio. It's just work nested in other
Yes.
work. And it's just boundaries between roles and accountabilities. And perhaps this is how we achieve some of that layering we were talking about, that just do the known and stable thing on time and on budget. And then next time we fold in a bit of community consultation and satisfaction and then the long-term outcome. And so depending on who you are, if you're a government agency responsible for recidivism, or if you're a tier 1 constructor responsible for building a physical jail, the point is that you have your project manager and your sponsor working hand in glove together to make sure that the way the assets, the physical products, services, results, whatever your project is creating, that the way that's done, the features it includes, is most likely to enable the delivery of the benefits post-project.
Yes.
That's the point. And even if it's not the project manager's accountability, if they're not thinking like that, then they're going to go off and build something in a strange and bizarre way. We call it a feral project. Well-intentioned, but just like totally gone off on a tangent. And in retrospect, you think like, what? And one of my favorite examples of this is a project. I use this in training all the time. This project happened in Western Australia and it was to build 10 houses near Broome. And they had a government client, tier 1 constructor doing the builds. Anyway, the schedule's getting further and further behind, right? So at a point in time, the project manager goes, that's it, stop. We need to catch up the schedule. They'd been using a combination of local workers and these gun subbies they'd been flying in and out for the work. So they said, okay, we're going to stop using the local workers. We're just going to fly in these contractors we've worked with for ages, and that's how we'll catch up. So it was a fairly common strategy. Strategy worked. They caught up and they gave themselves a big green tick on the post-implementation review because they built 10 houses on time, on budget. For the government client, this was such an embarrassing debacle of a project. The whole thing hit the press, which is when I found out.
Local labour.
Because actually, it wasn't about houses, and they were demolishing the houses at the end of the project. They didn't care about the houses. This was meant to be an opportunity to provide on-the-job training and work experience for Indigenous trainees who would then be able to get jobs on construction projects because they had real construction experience. And it was those trainees who'd been refused access to the site because they were too slow. Not accountable for employment rates.
Yes.
But if you're not thinking like that, then it's a forehead slapping moment for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And so where was the project sponsor in all of that?
Yeah, right?
Yeah, right? Where
So
were you sort of saying, oh, no, 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 no?
another competency
Yeah.
that we need to develop. Yeah, it's a different that again. And it really targets those higher order critical thinking, communication, collaborate, making sure you can have effective collaboration right through your supply chain, including that project manager who's doing
Correct,
that.
correct. So, last question for you. Looking ahead, how can organisations better treat training as a core element of quality and risk management to avoid the crisis that often ensues when we discover skills deficiencies too late?
I think you have got to see it as an essential part of being a high performing organization, sustainable organization. Your responsibility as an organization is to train your people, but also to look beyond the boundary of your own organization and start to think about how to, if we are delivering these things with supply chains for clients, with partner agent, it's one pool of skills. The fact that I train this person, they leave, can still be good for me because they could end up in my supply chain and they'll have goodwill or they'll have good skills that will help me in the end. So we've got to think about training people at a divisional, organizational, industry, and national scale. I think we have to embed it in their everyday learning. It can't be do the job and then over on the side is this luxury item called training that we've got no time for. It's got to be one and the same. And PMI is using this term organizational ambidexterity and agility to, like, we run the business while we change the business. We've got to extend that into people too. They've got to do their job and they've got to learn how to do that better and how to upskill for the next thing. And the environment's changing and that's driving that. But also people want to learn, they want to improve. We need to enable them to progress. And that feeds into a positive learning culture that means that when something happens, we share it and other projects don't experience that issue. So there's all these side benefits to it that, if you need a commercial justification for training your people, that's there. And if you need a risk-based reason for training your people, that's there too. Disasters could have been avoided if the person just knew how to do this thing or was aware of something. And so I think it's got to be owned at a really senior level. What I'm really liking is that L&D managers being elevated into a chief people officer or chief projects officer, or getting it at that level where that capability has the authority and the clout and the respect to actually make it happen within people's roles. And I think you've just got to reach for everything. There isn't one solution. You need your qualifications, your long format, immersive, multimodal, stay with it until you can get it. You need your pop bites that are like, oh, what's this again? I forgot because the course was 3 months. Click on this and I've got it. AI delivered package of morsel of information that I need. You need buddying up. You need communities of practice where people are sharing openly their experiences. You need all of it. And it can be led by L&D and it can be led by the PMO. I work with clients with both of those and they're doing really well. But when it's owned by no one, then everybody pays.
I think as well, I see a lot of organisations that recognise everything that you're saying, Kestrel, and they get it. But I was only able to get budget this financial year for a period of this time, and we need to get as much done during that time and then see you later until 5 years down the road when I get some more budget. And I find that really interesting because in today's day and age, I have worked for many organisations where the OPEX budget of the business is actually less valuable than the CAPEX budget of the business. And if we are wasting anywhere between 30 to 50% of the CAPEX part of the business, because CAPEX is something that we don't tend to rationalise very often. I've got more and more projects starting and more projects running than I ever have before, whereas OPEX, they tend to be getting a haircut on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And so when I look at this dynamic and I think to myself, if only you invested in that continuous learning and you had a continuous learning framework. Learning is not a bubble, that you do it and you burst it and you're done. It just doesn't work that way. It is continuous throughout our lives. We do not stop learning until the day we die. And from that perspective, why do you stop? Why is it only short bursts?
Yeah.
Kestrel, I'm in one of those roles where I'm part of the gig economy. Every 6 months, I join a new organisation. Every 6 months, I have to take the 6 or 8 induction courses. They're all exactly the same. I have to do risk, I have to do OH&S, I have to do bullying, I have to do cyber, I have to do security. I do all those courses and they're all the same. And it's really interesting because then when I sit down with people, they still can't tell me the difference between project risk and operational risk and how these two things happen. But we've got an operational framework, yeah, but that's not the same as project risk, yeah. We're dealing with things in a much quicker cycle most of the time. And how does one feed the other? And how does it end up being a continuous loop? And having the knowledge to understand that. I'm a big believer in everything that you've just said. I think you are 100% correct. At the end of the day, we need more of a focus on understanding projects. It is a big part of many organisations now. It is a skill set that is very different to an operational skill set. And I think the more we can focus on developing a continuous journey of learning, it's going to help us globally. It's not just a national thing. This is a global thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. And if you water your plant once every 5 years, it's going to die.
Doesn't quite work. All right, so tell me something then, Kestrel. Last question. As an accredited educator in project management, are you still learning?
Always. Constantly learning, and the 70 and the 20 and the 10. This is my 20. The structural writing and chatting and the artful argument and the IPMA events, the debates, all of that is getting together with peers and going, how are you doing it? What have you done? And all of that kind of chatting, watching other people, looking over the shoulder. I'm doing my 10. I'm using ChatGPT and the deep research to pull resources to me and information to me, and then I'm fact-checking everything. I'm making sure I've got a full library of books that I think are useful. And I'm going to paper as much as I'm going to chat and going to webinars where I get some facts and some information. So that's my 10. And then on the job, you just got to experiment. You got to try stuff. You got to see what works. And it's always nourishing and exciting. And I don't think I'm alone. I think people love to learn and grow. And if we're not doing that, then why are we alive?
Yes, 100%. I think that life is a learning journey. That's my motto. 3 things really quickly that you've taken from today's session that you would really like people to remember.
So 1, learning can look so different and there's no right way to do it. And if it should be a fruit salad, not an apple. So put your formal training in, get your 1 day off-site, drip feed it in like short online interactive things, have your community of practice. 2, work on culture. If people can't make mistakes, if people can't feel they can raise an issue or a concern without getting some kind of professional blowback or getting excluded, or if they don't have that psychological safety, then they're not going to learn and get better. So really think about culture, really think about how you mix up the methods and the forms of learning and not seeing it as that thing over there that I send people to as a luxury. And then thirdly, think about the core fundamental skills that everyone will need, no matter what technology does, no matter how AI comes in. What are the things we need people, humans, to be able to do? And they're not going to be great at it at the beginning, so they're going to need chances to layer that learning. Let them practice, let them learn from other people at a junior, entry-level, simple space so they can gradually get better at the more complex stuff that we need them to do.
Absolutely. Kestrel, it is always such a joy talking to you. I've seen you present now a couple of times and I'm always walk away feeling more learned than when I started. So thank you very, very much for sharing your deep expertise, your forward-thinking insights on transformation of project management training, and your passion for empowering professionals through credible, practical learning truly aligns with my mission here on the podcast. And I've got no doubt that our listeners will find tremendous value in your perspective. So it was a real privilege to have you here with me today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Daniela. And please keep it up. Your podcast is so great. I've enjoyed it so much.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of our faithful listeners for tuning into this episode of Powering ProjeX. If you found value in today's episode, please do subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. And you can follow us also on LinkedIn and X. Until next time, keep powering your projects from vision to victory. And remember, investing in credible skills today is the surest way to deliver success tomorrow. It's DK and Kestrel signing out. Thank you so much. Bye. The content provided in this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute professional, legal, or financial advice. The opinions expressed by the host, guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of any affiliated organisations or sponsors. While we strive to provide accurate and up-to-date information on project management methodologies and related topics, no guarantee is made regarding the completeness, accuracy, or applicability of the content to your specific circumstances. Listeners are encouraged to consult with qualified professionals before making decisions based on the information shared in this podcast. The hosts, guests, and producers are not liable for any losses, damages, or outcomes resulting from the use of this podcast's content. By listening to this podcast, you agree to assume all risks associated with the application of the information provided. Thank you for tuning in, and we hope you'll find value in our discussions.